Hello guys, this is Deepika from mytutorialrack.com. In this tutorial, we will talk about data types and variables in Salesforce. Now, what do you mean by data types and variables? So let's start with a variable. So anytime when you're writing a program, you do a lot of calculations. And in order to store these calculations, you use a computer memory, and computer memory is divided into different cells, and you use these cells to store a particular value. Let's say you wanted to do a calculation of 14 plus 17. In order to perform this calculation, computer needs to store these two values. So let's say the value 14 is stored in this cell and value 17 is stored in this particular cell. And we call this particular memory location, we give a name to this memory location as X. And to this particular memory location, we call it as Y. So X is equals to 14 and Y is equals to 17. X is pointing to 14, and tomorrow I can go ahead and change this X no longer points to 14. The new value is, let's say, 24. So now the new value of X is 24. Since the value that X is pointing to is changed, X is considered as a variable because the value of this has been changed. So X is no longer pointing to 14, it is pointing to 24. And similarly, you can go ahead and call this memory location as Y, and today it is pointing to 17. Tomorrow it might go ahead and point to 19. So in that case, the value of Y has changed. So that's why Y is also called as a variable. In any particular programming language, variable must have a name. These are two important things. Must have a name, and a variable must have a type. So in order to use a variable, why we need to use a variable? Because we need to perform calculations and we need to store those values in computer memory. So we need to name the computer's memory locations as something. So we use variable. And why we call them as variable? Because the values of those can be changed. So anytime you need to define a variable, you need to have a name for the variable, and you also need to have the data type. Now, what do you mean by data type? Means what kind of data that particular variable has. So let's say I wanted to perform a calculation of 10 plus 20. So now I need to go ahead and store these two variables, these two values. So I need two variables. So I will say, okay, the type of the variable must have a name. So I'll call this particular memory location as num1. And similarly, this also should have a name. So I'll call it this particular memory location as num2. So num1 has a value of 10 in it, and num2 has a value of 20. So we have satisfied this condition. Next condition says variable should also have a type. So now, since number 1 has a value of 10 in it, means it is a type integer. So the data type represents the type of data. So we call it as integer. Integer num1 has a value of 10 in it. This is called as declaring a particular variable. Now, data type can be anything. You come across different types of data in everyday life. You come across names of people. Computer has to store somebody's name. So you need to store names. Let's say you wanted to store how many miles you walk every day. So let's say 3.15 miles. So that's a different type of data. Let's say somebody is asking you, are you going to office tomorrow or not? So the answer to that can be true or false, right? Somebody asks you to store what's your age. So you'll say, let's say 26. That's your age. So these are different types of data. This is a different type of data. This is a decimal. This is something else. And this is number. So similarly, you have different types of data available. So we call it as different data types. So the summary of this till this point is a variable always should have a name, and it also should have a type. And why we call it as a variable? Because the value of it can be changed, and data type represents the type of data. Now, data type. In Apex, all variables and expressions have a data type. Data type represents the type of data. So a data type can be integer, it can be long, it can be a date, it can be a date time, string, ID, or a boolean. A data type can be an object like a Salesforce standard object like account, contact, or it can be a custom object, let's say positions dash dash C. It can be a collection. You wanted to store list of student names, or you wanted to store how many marks a particular student got in different subjects. So you wanted to store list of values. So then you will use something called as enum. So these are the different data types that are available in Apex. Now we have primitive data types. Primitive data types are the most basic data types that are available. Blob is a primitive data type. Boolean is a primitive data type. Integer is a primitive data type. Long, primitive data type. So these are the list of primitive data types that are available in Apex. Double, ID, decimal, datetime, date, boolean, blob, long, object, string, etc. These are primitive data types. Blob. Now, what do you mean by blob data type? So whenever, let's say you wanted to send an email or which has an attachment, or you wanted to send a document, that is considered as a blob. A blob is a collection of binary data stored as a single object. It can be an attachment, it can be a body of a document is also considered as blob. We will talk about more of this in the upcoming tutorials. Boolean. A Boolean, a value that can only be assigned as true, false, or null. That is called as a Boolean. So for example, here you can say, now if I ask you which is a data type, which is a name, and what's the value. So this is called as the data type. This is the type of data because it's telling you that this particular variable can either have a true in it or either can have a false. Is winner. So this is the name of the variable and this is what the value for the variable is. Similarly, this one, Boolean is winter is equals to false. So here, this is the data type. What is the name of the variable? This is the name of the variable. What is this? This is the value for the variable. So anytime you declare a variable, you have to specify the name, the type, and you might specify the value as well. So a value that can only be assigned true, false, or null is called as a Boolean. Date. So whenever you have to store a date, then you will use a date data type, a value that indicates a particular day. So it does not include time. It only includes date. For example, if I have to store my birthday is July 14. So this is a date. It does not have a time in it. So that is what I will use, a date data type. So how will I declare this variable? I will say, let's say I wanted to store my birth date. So I will say date of birth. Use something called as DOB, date of birth. That is the name of the variable. And you will say December 14th. So this is the type of the variable. This represents the name of the variable and December 14 is the value for this particular variable. Now, you can add or subtract an integer value from a date value, returning a date value. So let's say I can do something like July 14 minus 3. So this will return me a date value which will be equals to July 11th. So that is what it is saying. You can add or subtract an integer value from a date value. So this is a date. You can subtract an integer value. Integer is nothing but a number and it will return you a date value. So addition and subtraction of integer values are the only arithmetic operation that you can do. So I can do something like July 14 plus 3. That is equals to July 17. So I can perform this operation and this is a valid operation. Similarly, I can do July 21st minus 3 is equals to July 18. That is also correct because I can subtract or add an integer value from a date value and it is going to give me the result will also be a date value. But you cannot perform an arithmetic operation or arithmetic function on two date values. What does that mean is you cannot do something like July 17 plus December 14. This is wrong. You cannot do something like this. You cannot perform arithmetic operation on two date values. So date is something which does not have any information about time. It is just plain date. Date time. A value that indicates a particular day and time. So anything which has a day and time is called as a date time. For example, December 14, 2:30 p.m. So it has a date and it also has a time. That is what it's called as date time. Now, so you can also add or subtract an integer or a double value from a date time value and it will return a date value. So you can say December 14, 2:30 p.m. minus 3, that will be equals to December 11. So you can do something like that. You cannot perform arithmetic functions that will include two or more datetime values, means you cannot say December 14, 2:30 p.m. plus December 16, 7:10 p.m. You cannot do that. That is not allowed in case of daytime. So in daytime, you will have a date as well as time. Decimal, a number that includes a decimal point. So let's say you want a variable to store how many miles you walk in a day or how far is the distance from Dallas to Houston. So that is considered just a simple number. So that's a decimal. So let's say the miles that you walk is 3.14 every day. So that's a decimal. Anything which has a decimal point will be a decimal. For example, decimal D is equals to 2.34. In this case, decimal is what? This is a data type. D represents the name of the variable and 2.34 represents the value for the variable. So whenever you declare a variable, you have to specify the name and you also specify the type of that particular variable. So decimal represents the data type, D is the name, 2.34 is the value. So a number that includes a decimal point is a decimal data type. Double. Double also includes a decimal point, but it's a 64-bit number. So what does that mean is if you have to store a large decimal number, let's say I wanted to store the distance between sun and earth. So that's a large number. So in order to store a large number which has a decimal point, you will go for double. So the minimum value of a decimal or the tables have a minimum value of -2 to the power of 16 to a maximum value of 2 to the power of 63 minus 1. So this can be a range of values that you can store in a double. Means double can have this big value and a double you can store this minimum value as well. For example, double D is equals to 3.14159. So here the double represents the type of the variable, D represents the name of the variable, and this is the value for the variable. So the difference between a double and a decimal is that a decimal, the range of the number that you can have will be little less than what you can store in a double. When you have a large decimal value that you need to store, then you will use a double data type. When you have a small value to be stored, then you will go for something called as a decimal. When you have a large value, let's say you wanted to store the distance between Earth and Moon, then you will go, that is something that's a big value. It will be something like 37.65555, whatever, that's a large value. Then you will use a double. So double is a 64-bit number that includes a decimal point. ID. Any valid I-18 character force.com record identifier. So let's say you wanted to store an ID of a particular account record, then you will go ahead and use this data type called as ID. And it is basically will be an 18 character record identifier. As you know, every record in Salesforce has a unique ID to it. And if you wanted to use or wanted to store a particular ID, then you will use the data type called ID. Integer. Just like you have a data type called decimal and double to store decimal numbers, similarly you have an integer data type that does not include a decimal point. Means these are the numbers which will not have a decimal point in it. It's like if you wanted to store something like this, then you will use an integer data type. And here is an example how you have declared a data type called integer. So you will use the same pattern of data type, name, and value. So this is how you declare a variable. And guys, this is just a quick overview that I'm giving you about different data types and what they mean. But in my tutorials, I will go ahead and talk deep about each of these, how to use them, how to use them in examples. So just don't worry if you're not following along with me. Just stick here, go through all the next couple of tutorials, and you'll be able to follow each and everything. So this is just giving you a list of all the data types that are available in Apex. Similarly, you also have a long. Now, what does long represents? Long is similar to we have double. So just like double is used to store a large decimal number, long is also used to store a large number without a decimal point. So long can also range from minimum value of -2 to the power of 16 to the maximum value of 2 to the power of 16 minus 1. So if you wanted to store large values or large values without the decimal point, then you will use long. So there are different occasions when you're going to use different data types. So let's say you have a small decimal number that you want to store, that you will go for something called as decimal. If you have a large decimal number that you wanted to store, then you will go for double. Let's say if you wanted to store a small number, it's a simple number, then you will go for integer. If you have to store a large number without a decimal point, then you will go for long. So that is the four different data types. In order to avoid confusion, remember this. And the next one we have is a string. So any set of characters surrounded by single quotes is a string. So anything that you put together in a single quote, that will be considered as a string. So just like this. So you are using two single quotes. Anything or any set of characters surrounded by single quote is called as a string type. String S is equals to single quote, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. So these are set of characters. Anything in single quote is called as a string data type. Here the string represents, this is the data type. S is the name of the variable, and what is the value for the variable? This is the value for the variable. String size. Strings have no limit on the number of characters they can include. But you have something called as a heap size limit, which is basically used to ensure that your Apex programs don't grow too large. So these are the list of data types that are available in Apex, and these are the primitive data types that are available, the basic data types that are available. And what do you mean by each of the data types? What kind of information that you can store in those data types? To learn more, we will talk about in the next tutorial. Thank you.